This week on Jerusalem Dateline, from war to ceasefire to political crisis in less than a week. Will Prime Minister Netanyahu's government collapse? Plus, weapon wizards, a tiny country achieving great things, and a look back at the World War I battle that changed the Middle East. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. It was a wild time here in Israel. An Israeli military mission in Gaza went awry. Then a possible war with Hamas, a ceasefire, and then a political crisis, all in the span of about 3 days. We want to show you just how fast things unravel here. It all began when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu cut short his visit to Paris for World War I memorial ceremonies to address a deteriorating situation on the Gaza Strip. Officials closed schools next to the border after Hamas fired 17 rockets into Israel. The rocket barrage followed a firefight between IDF Special Forces and Hamas inside Gaza. One Israeli officer was killed, another severely wounded, while 7 Palestinians died in the assault, including 2 senior Hamas commanders. The IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot, called the battle a very meaningful operation to Israel's security. While in Paris, Netanyahu said there was no possibility of a peace deal with Hamas and compared an agreement with Hamas to one with ISIS.
There is no political solution for Gaza. I do not have a political solution with the Islamic State. I don't have a solution for Iran, as long as it declares it wants to destroy us. There is no such political solution.
Netanyahu added, Israel is the finger in the dike for Europe.
Israel is Europe's shield in the Middle East. It is as simple as that. If we were not here, then radical Islam would spread. We would do it first and foremost for our own protection. I do not want to mislead you, but when we defend ourselves, we also defend Europe, and I expect a change in Europe's approach towards us.
Netanyahu said he wants to avoid a needless war and even facilitated a transfer of $15 million from Qatar to pay civil servant salaries in Gaza. While the ongoing fighting threatens to erupt into a full-scale war, the UN and Egypt are trying to broker a ceasefire. Their attempt follows months of Hamas-led riots on the Gaza border, arson balloons that have burned thousands of acres, and a recent infiltrator that set fire to this greenhouse. After returning to Israel, Netanyahu met with his security cabinet to decide how to respond to what was the largest single-day attack since the 2014 war with Hamas. This is the sound of war in southern Israel. Gaza terrorists launched some 400 rockets at Israel. The Iron Dome anti-rocket system struck down about 100. Some fell inside populated areas. This is a building in Ashkelon that took a direct hit from one of the rockets fired out of Gaza about 12 miles to the south. You can see the walls that have been blown out. You can see this is the kitchen. You can see cookies in the cupboards. You can see the damage that had because of the rocket. A man in his 40s died because of this. 2 women were seriously injured. And this is just one of the hundreds of rockets that have been fired out of Gaza into Israel in the past 24 hours. First responders removed the man's body from the rubble. The barrage puts Israelis on edge. Biton Mamon lives next door.
The feeling is very bad. I have a father who is old, he's 19 years old, and he was terrible. Last night he was panic.
Israel police spokesman Mickey Rosenfeld said there are about 1 million Israelis affected by this current round of violence.
Well, the message to the public is to stay safe. When the sirens go off, there are 15 seconds or 30 seconds or 45 seconds to take cover.
The IDF responded by attacking some 150 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad military targets in Gaza, including a Hamas television station and governmental structures.
I think we're in a difficult period at the moment. It could be 24 hours, 48 hours. It will pass. The IDF is doing everything they can. The Israeli National Police are protecting the civilians within inside the populated areas, within inside all the cities in the south.
The U.S. led the condemnation of the rocket barrages against Israel. Jason Greenblatt tweeted, Israel is forced once again into military action to defend its citizens. We stand with Israel as it defends itself against these attacks. As Israel teeters on the brink of war, Mamon said if it was up to him, he'd know what to do.
Tell Trump to tell Bibi and Lieberman to work to finish this area, Gaza. That's it. They don't want to live in peace. They choose blood.
Then a new battle in Israel. The ceasefire led to quiet on the southern border, but also resulted in a political fallout and fresh challenges for Netanyahu. Here's that report, followed by an analysis with our CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl in our studio. Israel's Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman announced his resignation over the Israeli-Hamas ceasefire.
The ceasefire yesterday, combined with a long-term deal with Hamas, is a surrender to terrorism. There's no other definition, no other meaning, but surrender to terrorism.
Lieberman's party will now move to the opposition. That gives Netanyahu a very slim majority, which could bring about the collapse of the government and force early elections. Lieberman was also upset by an earlier decision allowing Qatar to give $15 million to Hamas. Before Lieberman's resignation, Netanyahu said he's looking at the bigger security picture for Israel, but can't share it publicly.
Our enemies begged for a ceasefire, and they know well why. I cannot detail our plans for the future. We will dictate the times and circumstances that are right for Israel and are right for the security of our people.
Hamas and other terror groups launched about 460 rockets at Israel over a 24-hour period earlier this week. Israel responded with at least 150 airstrikes on military targets in Gaza. Israelis and Gazans had different reactions to the ceasefire. Gazans mounted a huge victory rally in the streets near the former Hamas TV station that Israel bombed. Israelis in the south were furious over what they say is treatment like second-class citizens. For now, Netanyahu remains in power, but the next weeks and months will tell whether the tense calm in the south and the shaky government in Jerusalem will hold. Julie, it has been a wild ride here in Israel and on the Gaza border in the last week. We've gone from a possible war to ceasefire, now political turmoil. We talked in our report about a shaky government. What's next for Israel politically?
Well, it's likely that Israel will go to new elections. What's been interesting about this is usually your opposition brings you down, but this time it's people that are even further right than Netanyahu who are really complaining. It's his power base. The people in the south are complaining, hey, you're not taking care of us. We voted for you, and here we have rockets coming in on our head.
What does this mean for Netanyahu? Is it possible that he might not be the next prime minister of Israel after these elections?
It is possible. I mean, there's no one with his stature really on the scene, but people are kind of fed up with some of these things. He's also facing a lot of legal troubles. So it's possible.
Talk to us a little bit about the complaint that the residents in the South have. They're saying we're not second-class citizens. Why are they saying that?
Well, there was a comment made by another minister, which he later apologized for, that if the rockets had fallen in Tel Aviv, then we would do something. But the people are saying, look, we're just as important as the people in Tel Aviv. 500 rockets are falling on their head. We're talking about 1 million people that are in rocket range of Hamas rockets and rockets from the Gaza Strip. So they want to see action. They don't want to live in bomb shelters. They don't want to raise their kids that way. The kids are being traumatized. No one knows when the next round is going to happen. Okay, this one's over, but they live in fear all the time.
Yeah. We experienced that for a few hours when we reported on what was happening down in Ashkelon and Sderot, right along the Gaza border. But they are living with this for maybe 15 years or more, so you can understand their grievance. Why is it that the Israeli government is so reluctant to go ahead in a land war and actually go into Gaza and try to defeat them militarily?
Well, the idea is if they go in, who's going to take over? If they get rid of Hamas, who will take over? Israel doesn't want to be in charge of the Gaza Strip. Israel does not want to rule over 1 million plus Palestinians down there. And who will come next? Is it going to be an ISIS-type government? It likely would be somebody more radical.
Mm-hmm. Final question, Julie. Now, the Trump administration is talking about a peace plan, maybe announced after the midterms. Here we are after the midterms now. Could this affect the Trump administration's peace plan with new elections coming up?
I would think so, because Trump and Netanyahu have been very close, and they've been seemingly on the same page. If he gets another government in Israel, who knows if they're going to be on the same page or not. So it could very well affect things.
Yeah, we'll be following that. Fascinating things going on here. Very significant what's happening here in Israel and the entire Middle East. Julie, thanks for your analysis. Up next, how and why Israel became a weapons superpower in just 70 years. When Israel's enemies began shooting missiles into the Jewish state, they developed a system the equivalent of hitting a bullet with a bullet. That's just one example of how Israel became a world leader in developing state-of-the-art weapons. The story of how a tiny nation of 8 million became a global military superpower has been captured in a new book. When it comes to state-of-the-art weapons,
the Israeli military has succeeded in such a short time, in under 70 years, in establishing what's the most formidable, powerful militaries in the world, and possibly the most innovative military in the world.
Jerusalem Post editor-in-chief Yaakov Kass co-wrote The Weapon Wizards, how Israel became a high-tech military superpower.
Israel is at the forefront of missile defense technology, whether it's the Arrow or the Iron Dome, which everyone is familiar with. Israel is a world leader in drone technology. Israel builds its own tanks. Israel is leading in cyber warfare. Where did all of this come from? How did such a tiny little country in such a short amount of time manage to achieve such great success?
Katz says one reason Israel achieved this level of success is simply survival. 70 years ago, 5 Arab nations attacked Israel the day it was born, a country with no natural resources.
What was the one natural resource that Israel had? The Jewish brain. And those brains were what was used to be able to survive. So when you have this amazing recipe of threat, of this threat matrix, of your back up against the wall, you have no choice but to use the one thing you have, which is your brain, and you have to innovate.
And Israel did just that. Case in point, Israel's anti-missile defense system. The Iron Dome has shot down hundreds of rockets fired out of Gaza behind me into Israel.
That's how Israel said, 1 second, we're facing missiles that are coming at us from Iraq, from Syria, from Gaza. We have to come up with a system that doesn't exist in today's world. And that's how they came up with the Arrow, which can intercept ballistic missiles, and with David's Sling, which can intercept medium-range missiles, and with Iron Dome, which can intercept and is proven to intercept over 85% of the missiles that are fired from the Gaza Strip. And that's how Israel has developed this amazing technology that's still highly classified to detect the tunnels that Hamas is digging under the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip, a technology that exists nowhere else in the world. Because Israel's at the forefront of warfare, and because of these threats, it has no choice but to innovate and to create.
Not all of Israel's power comes from high-tech products. It also includes its people, especially how the Army produces a culture of independence.
We all think about the United States Army. Everyone's dressed in their uniforms, right? People take things very seriously. Everyone's saluting, sir, ma'am, all these terms. Israel's completely different. The ranks that you carry on your shoulder are meaningless to the in-between soldiers. That enables free thinking. It allows the chief of staff to speak with a low grunt soldier and be able to talk about things. And when you can talk about things, when you can have that free flow of information and ideas, you can create, you can innovate. People aren't afraid to speak their minds. That's a huge advantage of national proportion that I think you'll find nowhere else in the world but here.
While the U.S. provides major weapon systems to Israel, America's military also benefits from the real-life testing of its equipment.
One of the things that the U.S. benefits from is that Israel is the first country that has operational F-35s today. So now imagine Israel is flying its F-35s and engaging in combat with it, whether it's in Syria or somewhere else in the region. That information is then shared with the United States Air Force.
Katz says while Israel has shared a friendship with America, along the way, it's also had a helping hand from above.
I'm a believer myself, and I think that it can't just be that it's all on its own. Right? The hand of God, I think we see here almost daily in this country, in this region. The ingenuity, the entrepreneurship, the innovation is incredible. But there's that hand behind us that is pushing us along the way.
Katz agrees weapons, technology, and innovation are the centerpieces of his book. But there's more to the overall story.
Yes, it's about weapons. But it's also a story about, it's the tale of Israel. It's a story of an ancient people that returned to their historic homeland and against all odds, not just survived, but persevered. And that is the story of the State of Israel. That's the essence of the State of Israel.
Coming up, 100 years since World War I and the battle that changed the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu was one of dozens of world leaders to commemorate the 100th anniversary of World War I in Paris. The Israeli city of Beersheba played a key role in an epic battle that gave Great Britain control of the city. It's important because it helped set the stage for the re-establishment of the Jewish state. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu welcomed the Australian Prime Minister and New Zealand Governor to commemorate the victory of British, Australian, and New Zealand soldiers and the Light Horse Regiment a century ago.
Nearly 4,000 years ago, Abraham came to Beersheba, the city of seven wells. Exactly 100 years ago, brave Anzac soldiers liberated Beersheba for the sons and daughters of Abraham and opened the gateway for the Jewish people to re-enter the stage of history.
And they spurred their horses through that fire, those mad Australians, through that fire, and took the town of Beersheba, secured the victory that did not create the state of Israel, but enabled its creation.
The Battle for Beersheba was a turning point in the British conquest of the Middle East. That enabled British General Allenby to walk through the Jaffa Gate here less than 3 months later, on December 11, 1917, as the victor in the Battle for Jerusalem. Allenby, the first Christian conqueror in centuries, entered the gate on foot out of respect for the Holy City. Australian light horsemen made that possible.
The charge of the Australian Light Horse was significant because they were never trained to do this. They were what we call mounted infantry. They go up to the front line on horse, get off and go in as infantry. So this was something completely new. They'd never trained for it. And so upwards of 600 of these men, they just were given the order and they did it.
Australian author Kelvin Crombie teamed up with the director of the Australian Light Horse Association, Barry Waters, to spearhead the efforts to reenact the charge. More than 100 uniformed horsemen rode in the event.
Whoa! March! They had to get into Beersheba before the sun went down because the Turks were beginning to destroy the water wells.
It was important in geopolitical terms because it was the action that broke the back of the Ottoman Turkish Empire.
At the same time, a monumental decision was being made in Britain.
What's so amazing is that on the same day, at about the same time as this event took place, the members of the British War Cabinet were meeting in London and they voted for that great decision, which we now know as the Balfour Declaration, that the British government views would favour the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
Australians and New Zealanders are extremely proud of their role in Middle East history, like Australian Lance Corporal David Wood.
My great-grandfather was a member of the 1st Light Horse Regiment who held the back door open and stopped off the Turkish retreats.
It was his first trip to Israel, the country his great-grandfather Alfred had unknowingly fought for.
You feel proud and you feel a bit overwhelmed. To be around and to have been at the cemetery this morning and seen all the gravestones of my great-grandfather's mates is amazing and humbling.
Earlier in the day, those celebrating watched the Light Horseman parade down Beersheba's main street.
To be here at the place where the Australian victory occurred, and it was an incredibly gutsy effort, both men and horses.
It's all part of our national psyche.
I think it's another display of his awesomeness and how history is made with him in this scenario, and God being God and who he is and everything that he represents. Yeah, we get to be a part of it being Aussies.
Australia's Prime Minister summed up the part his countrymen had played.
They defied history, they made history, and with their courage, they fulfilled history.
Still ahead, see how CBN helped this Holocaust survivor. Jenny was just 3 years old when the Holocaust hit her Ukrainian village. She still suffers pains from that time, and recently CBN Israel helped her to get some much-needed equipment.
I remember everything like this happened yesterday. Jenny was 3 years old when the Holocaust came to her village in 1941. She and her family were forced to live in a ghetto in Ukraine.
We lived in a place where the horses stay, and this was very cold and smell not good. Nothing, not clothes, not shoes, not food.
As disease spread through the ghetto, Jenny's older sister died from dysentery. Jenny survived by gathering food from nearby fields. She had to crawl under a barbed wire fence to get it, but one day a guard dog attacked and mauled her leg.
I see this in my dreams sometimes.
When I met Jenny, she told me most of her family died in the ghetto and her father was killed fighting the Nazis.
I still cry. When I was young, I didn't think about this. When I was now this age, I remember bad memories, bad, very bad.
After Jenny got married, she and her husband moved to Israel and started a family. Now a widow, she lives alone and continues to struggle with bone and joint problems. So CBN Israel got her a walker with a chair to help her get around.
Oh, it does help me a lot. I can go outside. I can go and I can sit and I can walk and I can be independent. This like my car.
We also take Jenny food regularly and spend time with her. We even help her put together parties for the local Holocaust survivor group she leads.
I want to say again, thank God what He sent you to us. This make for us a warm and heart what somebody think about us. We know what if we have some hard time, we know somebody can help us. And we're very happy to have you. Thank you very much.
Well, that's an inspiring story. And if you'd like to contribute to CBN Israel, you can go to cbn.com. Well, that's it for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.